Hello and welcome to Bibliophilia. I'm Becca Chavez, and today we're talking about A High Wind in Jamaica. All right, welcome to the show today. Today we are here with John. John's my neighbor. I'm basically roping people, like people I know, into doing this show right now. But John, you have a show of your own called Audiobooks for the Damned, correct?
Yes, it's more like a book club than a show, but yeah, I'm one of a small cluster of fanatical volunteers who reads aloud and makes audiobooks of out-of-print film novelizations.
Yes, the first time I went to your apartment, I saw that there was a novelization of the movie Top Gun, and it just fascinated me that someone had done this. Someone had created.
Oh, yes, and that author, who is actually a woman, but she wrote as Mike Coogan, she's written tons of novels. Don't get me down this rabbit hole.
Okay. All right, so we have to thank our sponsors, of course, The Cruelty by Scott Bergstrom, who's a frequent guest. Right now we're doing a giveaway on our Tumblr page of The Cruelty. Like, you can win signed copies of The Cruelty on our Tumblr page. So go there and get that. And then another sponsor is Sexy Pizza. And Sexy Pizza is a local pizza place here in Denver. On Wednesdays from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., you can get $1 slice if you buy a drink. So that's a pretty good deal. So think about that next Wednesday. Right now we're doing a Kickstarter, so I want to plug that at the beginning of the show. It's weird because we're doing a giveaway of The Cruelty, but we're also trying to get your money. So it's odd. We're trying to raise $2,000. For those who don't know, McSweeney's, and I don't know why I'm kind of plugging them right now, but McSweeney's is also doing a Kickstarter where they're trying to raise $150,000. And they have already raised over $50,000 for their Kickstarter, and we have raised nothing. So head down to Kickstarter and type in Bibliophilia in the search engine, and you can find our Kickstarter. So, A High Wind in Jamaica. You recommended this book.
I did. It was a favorite of mine when I first read it 10 years ago, and I reread it again about a decade later, and it still captivates me.
It's really good. Like, rarely ever, I think, people have recommended other books in the past that we've read on the show, and this is the first one where I've been like, yes, this is really, really good. I really, really like it. I'm really excited to talk about it, but we're going to start with our 2-minute plot because we always do a 2-minute plot. Would you like to do a 2-minute plot today?
Oh, shucks. You might have to help me.
Okay.
Let me see. So it's about
Start.
these... This is set in the 19th century? Am I getting that correctly? It is the 19th century. It starts out on Jamaica, of all places. It's a family living on a plantation. This is more or less immediately after slavery has been abolished, but the aftershocks of it are still very visible. And there's a hurricane which devastates their plantation, so the parents decide to send their children back to England. And en route to England, the ship gets hijacked by some not particularly competent pirates. I think the book even points out that at this time, piracy is not really a great way to make a living on the high seas anymore. And they sort of accidentally get kidnapped and kind of become the bane of the pirate's existence. And I won't spoil the end unless that's part of the 2-minute plot.
Oh, that's part of the 2-minute plot. You can spoil the end.
Basically because of these children that the pirates can't get rid of. When they do finally get rid of them, they do get back to England. They get used as they lead to the pirates being convicted and hanged. And
not of piracy, but of murder.
Yes, and there's a whole there's a whole lot of minutia in that part of the book with the way the legal system operates. It's pretty interesting, but a lot of the book is very it explores a lot of the massive gaps between adulthood and childhood, and how children and adults perceive each other and the often very erroneous assumptions they make about those two phases of life. And it is that has a lot to do ultimately with how the pirates are convicted.
That's definitely something that when I was reading it, I think we all remember our childhood in a certain way, but we remember it through the lens of adulthood. But when I was reading this book, I was like, oh yeah, that's really what it was like. That's more of what it was like in some ways. But the book doesn't start out directly. I mean, it does talk a lot about childhood, but it really seems like it's going to be a book about colonialism, because it starts with the end of slavery. And it doesn't start by focusing on the family. It starts on focusing on these two heiresses who are incapable of doing anything. So they're taken care of by former slaves who either kill them or they starve to death. Like, it's never really...
Yeah, but they're kind of starved to death because they're not self-reliant at all.
They can't do anything.
And so their former slaves just basically let them die in their overgrown mansion or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But
I think with the children have a sense of superiority over other people, especially Emily, but who is one of the... Let's go over who the children... So Emily is probably the main character, and her older brother is John. They have, I think, 3 younger siblings.
Let's see, there's Edward and Rachel. I think Rachel's the youngest.
And Laura, right?
Is Laura the one has all the dollies?
I think Rachel has the dolls, and then Laura is like right above her.
I don't remember where Laura falls into this hierarchy.
They call them the littles. They call them the littlies.
The littlies.
Yeah. They're not fully formed people, really. They're just... A lot of the people that are in the book are kind of just there. Mm-hmm. And then there are 2 other children, the Fernandez children, which is Margaret and her brother Henry.
Is it Henry or Harry?
Maybe it's Harry. He also doesn't... It's not like he has a lot of autonomy. He's just a kid.
He's a littly.
Yeah.
And Margaret is quite the opposite of a littly.
No, Margaret's the oldest in the story. But there is this kind of forced superiority. In the beginning of the book, there's this kind of like weirdly forced superiority of the white people, because really they're not doing that great. Like Mr. Boz Thornton, who is the children's father, the reason he's in Jamaica is because he's a failure. Like, he can't hack it in England. So he goes to Jamaica, where he's... I don't know. I wouldn't say... Would you say he doesn't seem to be doing anything there either?
I'm not exactly sure. I get the impression he's possibly doing better than he would in England at that time. Later on, he's back in England and apparently doing okay. But yeah, he's definitely in Jamaica because times are tough. And
while he's there, yeah, he's in Jamaica because times are tough. It's not working out for him. But regardless of this, he still manages to kind of lord over the other. It's very clear that there's a social order, and the whites are on the top and the black people are on the bottom. And it becomes very obvious. Like in the second chapter, Emily, who kind of runs around, she's not tamed. She's not a tame child. She gets to do kind of what she wants. And Emily...
There have been efforts to tame her, but like, wasn't it when she hit the age of 8, her mother insisted that she wear a dressing gown when going swimming, but it just ended up almost drowning her, so she...
Yeah, so they said, you don't have to do that because it's not convenient. Growing up is not convenient.
It's all, it's the practicalities of the environment they're growing up in conflicting with, the English, very English morals they would be adhering to a little more strictly if they had their druthers.
Yeah, so they're quite wild, and at one point Emily is despite this kind of wild lack of decorum, they still have this idea that they're better than other people. And at one point, Emily finds this encampment of former slaves who ran away, and the kids had never seen a white person before. Like, they ran away scared. But she still goes into this, and she's not like, oh, look at these interesting people I found. Like, her response is she walks away with condescension.
Well, she's also, I just reread that passage on the way over here, and she's also kind of energized and stoked that they're scared of her. The knowledge that they're frightened of her sort of gives her this boost of confidence to walk right in there.
Yeah.
So.
She's not very pleasant. Do you think she's a pleasant character?
Not particularly, but it's weird. This book goes so inside the heads of children in a way that no other book really has, in a very unsentimental way.
I've noticed, like, the kids are really quite cruel, which is obvious from the beginning of it. It's not just Emily being happy that she has the power to scare these former slaves. It's that they mention that she's really adept at catching lizards, but then they're dead around her.
Yes.
Her room.
Oh, there's a great line, and I wish I had it in front of me, but yeah, when he talks about how she was very good at catching lizards without making their tails come off. Because I used to do this. I used to try and catch lizards, and there are these lizards that drop their tails in self-defense. So yeah, if you can catch one of those lizards without the tail coming off, that is a feat.
Well, Emily could do it, but then she lets them die in her room.
Then she lets them go in the room, and there's a line to the effect of her room being full of all sorts of creatures that she'd let loose there, most of them probably dead. But I mean, I don't know if the whole thing about this book is, I don't know, for all I know, that Emily is the type of person that you could meet later in life and maybe she'd be okay, but she's just in this very solipsistic childhood perspective that's reinforced by the class that she's growing up in, and
the environment.
Yes, and the privileged position she has being English and white.
And she's also given an extra privilege, which I think is androgyny on some level. She's allowed to do basically the same things that John does, and she does not. And I think it does sort of play a role in how she interacts with the people around it. Like, she's doing a lot of what John does. And while they're in Jamaica and while it's wild, this is all acceptable. But the second they get on the boat, there are 2 letters written back to the parents after they're on the boat. And one of them's from John and one of them's from Emily. In John's letter, he says that he hangs upside down from, like, the rigging. And he's like, oh, Emily did it too, but they didn't like, the sailors didn't like it much. So she stopped doing it. Because it's the first time, I mean, like, a little girl hanging upside down, she's going to be wearing skirts. You're going to see everything, I guess. And so that was really, like, the first time that anything related to her gender was imposed upon her, was going to, when she first gets on the boat to go to England. That's when she's dealing with the first signs that she's set apart from her brother.
Yeah, that's true. And then it sort of creeps out after they're on the pirate ship when...
Yeah, so they're on the pirate ship. We could say it. They're
on the pirate ship.
They're on the pirate ship, and there's a big question. So we had talked about the Fernandez children, which is Margaret and her little brother, who's going to remain nameless because we can't decide between Harry and Henry, which is fine. And it's not important. But the first night that they're on the pirate ship, the pirates aren't like, I don't think the pirates are terrible people. They're just shitty pirates. They're like, they don't use weapons. Like, if you're going to be a pirate, you have to use weapons. Like, they use the guns to shoot, but they don't want to kill people, I guess. They don't want to hurt people.
Yeah, but that's part of their survival strategy is not using weapons. Part of the one thing they do kind of have a talent for is plundering ships without using weapons, partially because ships that they plunder tend to assume that they have cannons hidden, which they don't. And there's that bit where it talks about how they don't carry cannons because on other pirate ships where they have cannons but hide them whenever they're inspected, you can see the scuff marks on the deck where they've been wheeled around. So their whole strategy is not having weapons, and if they do get searched, it's less incriminating evidence against them.
But it does kind of make the original sailors kind of weak, that they just kind of gave up the ship. They were like,
they did, and
well,
then they claimed that they were attacked. They made is it Marpole? Is that the captain of the ship?
I think so, yeah.
So there's that whole bit. The first we hear of the if I recall correctly, the first that the reader hears of the pirate plundering that ship is in the letter from Marpole, where he claims that they outgunned them and claims that they murdered a bunch of people and shot the children dead. But that's just him trying to cover his ass because he got schooled by a bunch of pirates with no weapons.
A bunch of non-violent pirates.
Who distracted them. Well, they were distracted trying to get a monkey drunk so they could cut its tail off because its tail was cancerous, and B, they were just sort of taken by surprise, and the
pirates had people on the boat that were dressed as women.
Yes.
And the women were there to trick them into thinking it was a passenger boat so that they would let them, and then when they got off, it was just like really effeminate men. And but I think that Marple's, like when I first read Marple's story, I was like, whoa, it's kind of crazy. But you can tell he's lying in the letter because he does change the story a bit. And to be fair, I think Marple legitimately thought that the children had died because for those listening, what happens is the pirates take the children onto their boat to have dinner, which seems kind of weird, but they're nice pirates, I guess, as far as pirates go. So they take the kids on the boat to have dinner. And then during the dinner, the pirates push some trunks off the deck. They're empty trunks that I guess they had picked up from the other ship. And then you hear Captain Marple cry out, and then the pirates are like, "Oh, we're going to give you back," but the ship took off. Like it sounds like they thought the trunks were dead bodies that were being thrown into because it was dark, it was nighttime. And then when they weren't, then the kids are stuck, essentially.
And more importantly, the pirates are stuck with the kids.
Yes, which
ultimately is worse for the pirates than the kids, perhaps.
Yes, it is, and I think it's because of that idea that the pirates, I mean, they're pacifist pirates, I guess. But
I don't know how they're pacifists for largely pragmatic reasons. I mean, I don't get the impression that any of the pirate characters necessarily have the necessary ruthlessness to actually murder other human beings. But there's also sort of a pragmatism to their not killing people.
Yeah. But someone dies anyway. Like the day basically they get onto that pirate ship, the night so the pirate ship, as pirate ships do, takes other goods and then tries to resell them in Cuba. And it's wildly unsuccessful. Their auction of the goods that they've just stolen. They're not very competent pirates. They're not competent at this aspect of the job, I guess. So they did take a ship without weapons. And that evening they go out, and there's a nativity scene, I think. And John, Emily's older brother, is leaning over a balcony, and he falls and breaks his neck and dies. And the pirates' response to this is like, just don't tell them. And amazingly, the kids are all okay with it.
Yeah, I think the author's point, which rings true to me, because I've had some, in my childhood, I went through some dramatic, sudden changes of circumstance, and I think, what was it Richard Hughes said at some point? He said a catastrophe is only was it a catastrophe comes from knowledge of a catastrophe comes from
It's like experience or
Yes.
after the fact. Yeah, a thing only becomes a catastrophe with experience, which is why in the early stages, there's a couple things that happen. First, there's this earthquake, and then there's the hurricane.
Yes.
And Emily's really excited about the earthquake because she's like, yeah, the Fernandez children told her it's an earthquake. And she's like, I lived through an earthquake. This is so cool. Like, this is the coolest thing that's ever happened to me. And then this hurricane happens, and it's not this, like, the part that she remembers of the hurricane is that her cat died. Like, she doesn't remember other
She
aspects
doesn't even
of it.
see her cat die. She just sees their cat get chased through the house during the hurricane by a pack of feral cats, which chase it off into the bushes and so for the rest of the novel, she keeps flashing back to that and imagining her tabby getting torn apart in the most hideous ways.
And the weird thing is, a man died, like, right in front of them. Like, a servant that was on the property, he died. He was struck down by lightning. And that doesn't make as much of an impression on them. And I think it's just about this transitory nature of being a child, that they're accepting whatever it is that's right in front of them. Their parents tell them they have to leave, and they're like, okay, they were on one ship, now they're on the pirate ship. Okay. I mean, like, what else are they going to... There's even a scene, like, during the auction, one of the Lidleys, Edward?
Yeah, Edward. All I know about Edward is he's the one who gets all excited about pretending he's a pirate too.
Yes, but he's also...
He is one of the
There's-
younger ones, though, I believe.
Yeah, and there's a Spanish lady, a fancy lady of the island, who shows up during this auction, and she kind of, like, grabs him and puts him in her lap and starts cuddling him and kissing him. And he just goes along with it because that's just what he's going to do at the moment. And it just seems like, I don't know. I had this dog once, and I took her to a dog park. And this is totally different. But I took the dog to a dog, and she was such a friendly dog, but she was also blind. And so I took her to a dog park, and I was on the phone talking to a friend of mine, and with one of my other dogs. And she just went off and joined this other family. It was just like, cool, look at these other dogs I met. I'm going to hang out with them forever and just follow them around and do what they do. And we're going to be best friends. And it was like, you can't do that. You have to be part of my family. But it was, again, that transitory nature. And I'm not saying that kids are like dogs, but on some level they are.
Although Richard Hughes strongly implies that children are more animalistic, and especially the younger ones. Like he describes how Laura is straddling the foggy abyss between the weird insect-like mind state of babies and the more human childlike mindset of being a young child. I feel so bad because in his peculiar idiosyncratic way, Richard Hughes has such a beautiful way with words, and I'm
It's
umming
really
and erring all over.
well-written book. It's definitely a lot better than last week's choice. But and I think that's something about the transitory nature of childhood really comes through with the way that he's writing. I found it to be, I think you had mentioned earlier that you found it kind of clunky in an odd way, but I found it to be really kind of dreamy, like going in and out.
Well, I use the word clunky, and that word, whether you mean it to or not, kind of connotes amateurishness and a poor quality of writing, but that's not what I meant to
Convey.
It had been a decade since I read it last, and I remember I read it twice when I was in my 20s and loved the heck out of it. And when I read it again, I was kind of, I've absorbed many other books since then and sort of broadened my tastes in writing, and I have an appreciation for writers who, like Edward Abbey, who do good things with words, and Ernest Cline who doesn't, but and it was I liked Richard Hughes's prose, but it was just so weird. He does things that if other writers did them, it would seem like bad writing sometimes. The way he has sentences structured in really odd, sometimes almost fragmentary ways, but he makes it work. He also does this interesting thing with perspective shift where for the most part, the book is is an omniscient narrator, but then he sporadically inserts himself into the prose. And
yeah, especially towards the end of the book, I found he was doing it more.
yeah, and it's like it's omniscient, but then occasionally he goes, but I wouldn't know.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting kind of. It becomes more telling in that way. But also, I think that I don't know what it was. I really like that. I think a lot of that was that felt kind of like a children's book when he would do that. I guess I feel like children's books kind of talk to you in this weird way.
It was kind of like he was telling a story to you, the reader, who is a group of children listening with rapt attention. But then it's not exactly
It's not a child-friendly book.
I first became aware of this book because my eccentric and very British mother tried to press it upon me several times when I was a child, and I never read it. I kind of went, eh. And then I didn't read it until I was in my 20s and, was blown away by it at that point. So I had the chance to read it in childhood, and I have heard of people, I've read reviews of it by people who described reading it as children and enjoying it, and then reading it years later as adults and going, holy shit, this is fucking dark.
Someone gave this to me to read.
and they still, they liked it, but on a whole other level.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of sad that I didn't read it when I was a child, because from what I have, if other people's experiences are anything to go by, it might be a book that it kind of works on the levels. It works on those different levels in a way which sort of supports everything he's trying to convey about the different mindsets between adulthood and childhood.
And I think that's very clear in what happens to Emily and Margaret when they're on the boat. The first night that they get on the boat, Margaret is crying. And people are like, why are you crying? Like the other kids are asking her why she's crying. And she's saying, oh, you wouldn't understand. And then, for the most part, the pirates do leave them alone. Except for this one night when they've been drinking. They come down, and then the pirate starts... He grabs... It's not aggressive. It sounds very...
Doesn't he just, fondle Emily's head or something?
Yeah, he fondles her hair. It's not like... You're not, shocked. You're more, tense, I would say. When I was reading it, I wasn't like, oh my God, we're going to go into Lolita territory. I was like, oh no, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And then she bites his thumb and runs off. And it leads to this big misunderstanding kind of between he goes back upstairs because the kids are in the hold or something. And he, of course, is embarrassed because he just did this awful thing. It didn't come to anything except for a bitten thumb for him. But he's very embarrassed. And Emily is embarrassed because she thinks she did a bad thing because she shouldn't have bitten him, which is very... And I think depending on how you read, as an adult reading that, I know that he's in the wrong. But I think I could see, as a child reading that, being like, oh my goodness, I can't believe she bit him. And so I think there's a lot that's kind of left unsaid. And that's just a big example of how you could have different readings as an adult and have as a child.
And a lot left unsaid about Margaret, because it gives you just enough information and just enough lack of information to wonder what she's doing when she's spending the night in with sailors.
She, after this, this was such a weird thing. I didn't know how to take it, but after this incident with Emily biting the thumb of the captain, Emily's trying to make it up to them in this weird sort of childlike way, and Margaret becomes kind of obsessed with the pirates, and she really lays on thick with Otto, the first mate, and he eventually takes her into the captain's quarters, and the kids just don't really see her anymore. And it's not, they never actually say what happened. How old is she in the book?
I believe she is 15.
Okay, because I read that and I was like, oh, I thought they were younger, but no. As long as you're confirming, like, second, yeah. So she's kind of at that age where she's knows.
Yeah, on the cusp, and very creepily so. But yeah, but nothing is explicit. The closest it comes to really not quite, but almost confirming some readers' suspicions is after they're rescued. And okay, rescued is the wrong word. The pirates actually end up giving the kids to a passenger steamer they encounter. Mm-hmm. And they go through this whole elaborate thing where they find some forged papers that Captain Johnson bought ages ago and repaint the whole ship to make it, so basically giving it a fake ID makeover so that they can cover their asses after they hand the kids off. And they hand the kids off to this English passenger steamer they encounter. And it's after they're, booking it from that the kids, well, Emily in particular, basically blows their cover.
Yeah, they tried to coach the kids. And coaching the kids is something that happens repeatedly in the story. Like the mother, Mrs. Thornton, Emily's mother, has this idea of what the kids are thinking, like what she thinks the kids are thinking in the beginning. But in the end, when they come back, or even right before, like the pirates are coaching them. And then afterwards, after all this confession, the pirates have been captured, the parents and a lawyer are coaching the kids on how they basically are like, okay, what happened? And when the kids aren't explaining, they're like, well, this is what happened. Just say this. Just say this is what happened. And that's when it comes out that something may have happened with Margaret.
Yeah, and it's after they're back in England, I believe, that it's Margaret's aunt, I think.
Yeah.
Who, she's shaking her head and making insinuating comments about what probably went down, but it's not confirmed, and it's no more a reliable source of information than the other grown-ups' very predictable ideas of what it must have been like for the children to be kidnapped by pirates and how horrible it must have been for them, even though that is
there's no
grossly oversimplifying it.
I think, too, with Margaret, I think at the end they're like, what happened to her? Someone asked, and the Anna's like, well, what do you think?
Yes.
She never even says it. She's just like, what do you think? And so it's all about what's happening in the imagination of the adults. And
I think probably we keep treading into territory where it will be helpful to know about the Dutch captain.
Yeah, we'll go. Yeah. Okay, so the Dutch captain, they find another ship to pirate.
Yes. Well, a ship which is having difficulties and it's sort of foundering. And so they're grateful for what they think is help when the pirates show up.
But it's not help because they're pirates. Even if they're pacifist pirates, they're still pirates.
Now, there's a T-shirt. It's not help because it's pirates.
Oh, we can make that a T-shirt for the Kickstarter.
There you go.
But they... so they take the Dutch captain on board the ship. And Emily... Oh, goodness.
Okay, so we got to backtrack.
Yeah.
Okay. Which of the Littlies was the one with all the little dolls?
I think
all
it
the babies?
was Rachel.
Okay, so Rachel, the youngest daughter of the Bass Thornton family, is constantly collecting little pieces of lint and cloth and little scraps of metal, and it's a marlin pike, isn't it?
I believe so. And everyone's scared of it. They know it's like a bad thing's going to happen.
She collects all this crap and treats it like dolls and calls it her babies. And if people try to sweep the pile of trash and stuff that she's accumulated, she freaks out and goes, "My babies, my babies." And one of her quote unquote babies is this very heavy, sharp marlin pike. It's like a sharp, pointy metal thing that you stab fish with, I guess.
Yeah, I wasn't exactly clear. I just knew it was dangerous and pointy.
Dangerous, heavy, and pointy. And so the sailors are keeping an eye on her because she's always climbing up into the rigging with the damn thing. And at one point,
It's right after. So Emily, because she bit the captain, and she goes to make it up to him, and I guess she kind of does, but then she gets embarrassed by how she's done it, and she runs away. She starts doing somersaults to get away from him, which is such a childish thing to do. And just as she's somersaulting underneath where Rachel is sitting, the marlin pike drops and it hits her leg.
and it makes this nasty, nasty cut in her, is it her calf?
Yeah, and the captain does. And I think it's so great because I think it really actually shows the compassion and caring of the pirates, that they're not evil pirates. I just like, they're pirates, but they're not like the worst pirates you get. And
They're not the nicest, most compassionate people in the world, but they're not horrible people. They have basic human, social, primate empathy responses to, they're human.
And they freak out because Emily's hurt, and the captain puts her in his quarters. So she's alone in his quarters, and she's drawing all these pictures all over the wall. But obviously, that's also where Margaret is. And then when
was Margaret in those quarters?
She
too?
was like in the first mate's quarters. I don't think she was
with
like
Otto.
in the exact room with Emily. She wasn't
Right,
there.
okay.
But Emily's in this extended convalescence, and that's when they take the Dutch ship, and the Dutch captain comes on board, and they tie him up and put him in the captain's quarters. And it's not, the way it's described is that it's not that he's particularly bad. It's not that he's particularly scary. It's that he's trapped and he's trying to get away. And that's scary. If somebody that you trust, I guess, like, because the kids have grown to trust and sort of love these pirates that they're living with, and now they've taken care of Emily while she's sick. There's a connection there. And it's, if somebody that you love and trust has put someone in a position where they're tied up and that person is trying to escape, and I think that's what spurs it, that she's so frightened, that she's just so frightened of what would happen. And she doesn't know what would happen, but she sees the Dutch pirate going for this knife. And even though she's seriously injured with her leg, she goes and does her best and gets the knife and then stabs him repeatedly.
And not like deep, mortal stab. She just gives him a lot of little cuts, basically, but enough so that he eventually bleeds to death.
And Margaret's the only witness to this. And when the pirates come by, they think Margaret's done it, and they just pick her up and throw her overboard. I believe the captain says to Otto, "That's your problem. Like, you started this, that's your problem." And they just pick her up and toss her overboard. Fortunately, she's picked up by a boat that's coming in from the Dutch ship, and they don't know what's happened, so they just bring her back. And then she returns to the children. Like, she doesn't go back, and their response is like, "Hey, Margaret's back." Like, they just didn't think about her at all while she was gone.
Children kind of had contempt for her as well.
Yeah. Well, she wasn't the same. She was
she's part of the Fernandez family.
Yeah, which is Creole.
Yeah.
And they were a little bit more savage than the others. But her brother was there, and no one was really...
Well, because he can fit
stayed
in with the Littlies more.
Yeah.
And Margaret is part of that weird other, not quite a child anymore. She's 15.
Yeah. And I think she just loses it. I don't know. I don't think she's really kind of crazy. Okay, so when I wrote the notes for this, because I she's such a complicated character, I think. So I just think Margaret doesn't really understand sexuality when she gets on the boat. I don't think and so for your first sexual experience to be a much older man who's also a pirate that has captured you, and you're kind of in this weird way beholden to him. And
again, we don't know for sure.
Yeah, and it's
what
it's very odd because like right after she starts following them around, right after the thing with Emily and the biting, is she jealous? Like what is, or is she curious?
I'm not sure.
There's no indication given.
I'm not sure.
And I just worry about what's going to happen to her later on in life. Like,
well, they're definitely they're going back to a English society which is very comparatively socially constricted compared to
a pirate ship.
Compared to a pirate ship, compared to what we would consider normal civilized life.
Yeah.
So this is before post-traumatic stress syndrome was a thing.
And I think that plays a role in the very end. So because coming of age, sort of, it's happening to Emily and to Margaret at the same time in these very wildly different ways. And Emily's starting to understand who she is, but she's killed a man, and it's very scary. And that's really what prompts the pirates to be like, oh, screw this, we got to get rid of these kids now. But Emily kind of realizing who she is, and I think that when she gets onto this, I think this passenger ship is really the moment where she fully accepts her own kind of, it fully accepts where she's going to go as a woman, like how she's going to be a woman. Because there is a woman on the ship who she kind of becomes a little infatuated with, and she keeps talking about how soft she is and how
Miss Dawson.
Yeah, and how beautiful she is. And I think, and she seeks the approval of Miss Dawson, and that's why she tells on the pirates, because she knows the whole story and she's going along with the story. But Miss Dawson is there, and she wants to kind of impress her, and she tells her the story of the pirates, which leads to them being captured, and then they find out about the Dutch captain.
Well, they find out the Dutch captain is missing. They never really get a clear. Do the people trying to prosecute the pirates ever actually get a clear idea of what happened to the Dutch captain? Or do they're aware that guy's missing, and then Emily has her breakdown in court where she's just babbling about blood and murder, but she's not talking specifically about other people. She's not saying the pirates murdered him, but she's just basically freaking out about her own experience of panicking and stabbing the Dutch captain.
Yeah, and
that's all.
Oh, yeah. So they do say that he died. Her quotes. She was coached on what to say, and then you get cross-examined, and you can't coach for a cross-examination. So the coach for the cross-examination, it's been suggested that someone was murdered. The guy says, "Did you see any such thing happen?" And that's when she just breaks apart, and I think she kind of goes into PTSD a little bit, and like. Her response is just, he was all lying in his blood. He was awful. He died. He said something and then he died. And she doesn't say who did it. She doesn't say how it was done. She doesn't say it was me. She doesn't say it wasn't Emily. Or it wasn't Margaret. She doesn't say it wasn't the captain. She doesn't say it was. It's all so vague. And they hang the pirates based on this. And it's
because it's vague, and no one's going to jump to the conclusion that everyone's going to jump to the conclusion the pirates did it. No one's going to stop and think, maybe it was her. Maybe this 10-year-old girl actually murdered him.
But I feel like her father kind of did. Did you? Because he's like, while they're driving away or riding away, he's kind of like looking back at her, and she says something very casual about this, like, why did I have to learn all those questions? And he's like, does she really not know? He's like thinking, does she really not know what she just did, or the gravity of what she just did?
And I think he's also kind of disturbed by her apparent lack of emotion over what she's been through and what she's talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's actually described as frightened of her on the drive away from the courtroom.
She's a scary one. And I will say this, like, she does end up, she goes and she kind of fits in with her new school, and she just moves on. I think as the final thing.
Great last line in this book.
Oh yeah, it is really good.
I'm going to read it.
Yes.
Looking. Okay, it's two sentences. I'll read them both.
Yeah.
In another room, Emily, with the other new girls, was making friends with the older pupils. Looking at that gentle, happy throng of clean, innocent faces and soft, graceful limbs, listening to the ceaseless, artless babble of chatter rising, perhaps God could have picked out from among them which was Emily, but I am sure that I could not. And another last-minute interesting introjection of Richard Hughes as an eye into the narrative.
Yeah, and right at like a perfect time too. It's a really good, solid ending. The way she's just gonna, I mean, okay. So one of the last things I'll bring up as a final thing. Emily, as I mentioned earlier, she talks about that earthquake, and when she gets onto the passenger ship, she meets like a baby alligator that bites her finger. And
oh man,
to her,
the alligator is an incredible little moment.
These things are bigger than the pirate ship thing.
The earthquake, the death of her cat, and sleeping with an alligator.
Those are big things, but being on a pirate ship is not. And I think that's very kind of telling about trauma in this way. Like, because at a certain point, it just has to be life. Like, and I think that's really what they're getting at, that we define life more by moments than we do by life itself. Like today, I'm not defining my day by, I don't know, what did I do today? I went to the gym. I read some. It was just simple things. It wasn't like, unless something big happens, that's not how you define your own life.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely a thing that's happening here. That's kind of what he's saying. So.
There's, I don't know, I guess we're getting short on time.
No,
but
you have a time. Go ahead.
Okay. I mean, there's not enough time in this room to talk. I mean, this is a sort of book where once a conversation gets going, it goes down rabbit hole after rabbit hole after rabbit hole. But I don't know exactly why. I mean, I'm sure there are good reasons, but I can't articulate them. I was really struck by the scene where she gets a baby alligator. I think Harry, Margaret's younger brother, shows it to her. Is it him?
No,
or it's
no.
Another. It's a student. It's
Laura
another.
has made a friend. Laura or Rachel has
Right.
made a friend who has the baby alligator.
Who also has an age name like Harry or Henry,
Yeah.
which further confuses it if you don't have it in front of you. But but yeah, she ends up sort of borrowing the alligator from this young friend of Laura's, and lies in bed, and it slips down her nightgown and sleeps there because it's warm. And I might just have to read the part. It's just there's something about it that's kind of brilliant. I can find it. And one reason I'm confident I will quickly find it leafing through the book, which without having marked the place, is the way the paragraph is spaced.
Oh, okay.
So Emily lifted a finger and began to rub the corner of his jaw. The hiss changed to a sound almost like a purr. A thin, filmy lid first covered his eye from the front backwards. Then the outer lid closed up from below. Suddenly he opened his eyes again and snapped on her finger, then turned and wormed his way into the neck of her nightgown and crawled down inside, cool and rough against her skin, till he found a place to rest. It is surprising that she could stand it as she did, without flinching. And then there's this big space, and the last line of the chapter, or the part of the chapter rather, is the single sentence which says, alligators are utterly untamable. I don't know what it is about that, but it sets all these mystery klaxons off in my head. And it's such a great cap to the trifecta of Emily's significant experiences in her own mind of the earthquake, the death of Tabby, and then sleeping with the alligator. And I don't think we explicitly said this, but she during this book, before she starts to get a sense of her own gender, she earlier than that, she, for the first time in her life, becomes aware of herself as a individual, as an I.
Yes, and she sees herself as very godlike, which I found very disturbing. But it goes back to like the colonialism stuff in the beginning, and just how she interacts with other people. She sees herself as very godlike.
And becomes distant from the other children for the most part.
Yeah. I think that happened like kind of after the biting of the. This is such a good book. Like seriously, I really strongly recommend that you read this book. I put a link up to it so that you guys can buy it, like our listeners can buy it from the tattered cover. A copy of the book because you have the copy that I put up. It's like the New York Review of Books.
Is this visible on the YouTube camera?
Oh, look at that. You're on the YouTube thing. But not a lot of people watch the YouTube thing.
For those watching on YouTube.
But it's got an illustration by Henry Derger on the front. It's Henry, right? Henry Derger?
Yes.
The front. And if you're not familiar with him, he was kind of this... It's such a good cover for the book because he was kind of this like interesting guy. He was like mentally handicapped in some way, I think, and probably autistic, but nobody really knew what autism was. And he did all these drawings of little girl. He like created this alternate universe with little girls who all had penises because he didn't know the difference between little girls and little boys. He's got a fascinating story too, but obviously we're not going to talk about that because we're not a podcast about artists. So you can just go and Google or watch this movie called The Realms of the Unreal, which is narrated by Dakota Fanning, and
it's pretty fascinating.
It's pretty interesting, and anyway, I think it's a really fitting cover for it because my cover's lame. My cover's just got a parrot. Like there's not even a parrot in the book.
There might be on cue, but it gets the job done. But
yeah.
No, this is if you are a sucker for really good editions of books, the New York Review Books Classics edition of A High Wind in Jamaica.
It's got an essay by Francine Prose, who we'll discuss when we discuss Anne Frank, because Francine Prose wrote. I'm just getting off on tangents now. Francine Prose wrote a really good book on Anne Frank, where she explores Anne Frank as a writer as opposed to as a 13-year-old girl, which is where most people look at Anne Frank.
Interesting.
Yeah,
but that's another story.
It's totally a different story, but we'll talk about that at a different time.
But if Francine Prose has praise for High Wind in Jamaica, you know it's got something going for it.
Francine Prose is a pretty big deal. She's hot shit. She recently wrote a book called Lovers of the Chameleon Club in Paris, 1923. It's hard to find because it's so good that it just sells out. So if you can find that one, send it to me.
Never even heard of it, but I'll have to check it out.
Because I need it.
On another sort of tangential note.
Sure.
Since we're talking about other writers kind of by accident, you and I both discovered today. So there is a film adaptation in 1965 of A High Wind in Jamaica, and it's not bad. I'm going to say right now, read the book first. Give it, the movie has a lot of good stuff going for it. It also doesn't even touch some of the brilliance that the book has, but it's not terrible. And fun little bit of trivia. Martin Amis, who is a very well-known English writer, as a child played one of the children in that film. And I just discovered this today.
Yeah, I actually posted a thing about it on our Facebook yesterday, but no one really paid that much attention to it because it was like a YouTube clip, and those things never gain much traction. But yeah, so Martin Amis, famous author. His father, Kingsley Amis, also famous, wrote Lucky Jim. Those are some So
there's a memoir by Martin Amis called Experience, which I promptly put a hold on at the Denver Public Library. But in this memoir, apparently he talks, probably briefly, but he talks about his experience as a child actor on the film adaptation of A High Wind in Jamaica.
this is like the only thing he did, right? So like experience as a child actor. That one time my dad got me a spot on this movie.
Yeah. As far as I know, but it's I've been meaning to read Martin Amis for ages, so this might be the final straw that pushes me into him.
We could just go off Hughes for this Hughes book. We'll read some Prancing Prose. We'll read Anne Frank. We'll read
Richard
both the
Hughes
Amises.
wrote, I think, 3 other novels.
I know that after this one, he took a break of like 50 years or something ridiculous. Like he wrote this book in his 20s and didn't write again until he was like in his 70s.
Yeah, he wrote this book in his late 20s. It was 28 or 29, I think, and then he. How long before he wrote?
I want to say 50 years, but hang on. I'm going to Google and then.
Use the internet. I think his next book was
Richard
called
Hughes.
Typhoon.
So he lived a really long time, just so everyone knows. He was, he had just turned 76 when he died. In 1976. Lucky man. Look at that. Born in 1900. That's a good way to know how old people are.
Yeah. And I believe he had a background in writing poems and plays before he ever wrote his first novel, A High Wind in Jamaica.
Probably. You know what? This is, yeah. So he wrote A High Wind in Jamaica, otherwise known as The Innocent Voyage, in 1929. And then oh no, it was a lot quicker, I guess. He didn't do much. He wrote like an allegorical novel in 1938, and then he didn't write again until 1961. The Fox in the Attic was his next.
Well, I think he finished 2 out of an intended 4 books that was sort of a human condition drama inspired by the rise of Nazism, which I'd be very curious to read. I haven't. People don't talk it up the way A High Wind in Jamaica gets talked up.
Yeah, because I'm sure there's going to be tons of people who are like, whoa, been waiting to hear this podcast for a while. High Wind, and that's not true. Like, people in England really like it, is what I found. But in America. So maybe we'll get some new listeners who will all know about Sexy Pizza now. But we have to wrap it up because now we really are getting into wrapping it up, period. So thank you for listening. Read this book. You can buy it. Like I said, we've got a link on our Facebook page. Theme music is by Joseph Scardetta. Thank you so much. Next time we're talking about Catch-22, which is by
Joseph Heller.
Joseph Heller. It's a fantastic book. It's very complex, but it's really great. The character is just like I'm rereading it again, and he goes off on these tangents that are so weird. But yeah, next week we're going to read Joseph Heller, and then I don't know after that. Hopefully something by a woman, because we like diversity.
Francine Prose.
Maybe something by Francine Prose, but probably not.
Do some Margaret Atwood.
That's what I was thinking, like
Handmaid's
Cat's Eye. Well, A Handmaid's Tale, yeah. So it's kind of between Cat's Eye and The Handmaid's Tale. The Handmaid's Tale is like really good, but I've heard Cat's Eye is like unbelievable. And I like reading the ones I haven't read before because it makes me feel.
Can I make a comment about Handmaid's Tale?
Sure.
Do I have time? I haven't read Cat's Eye. I haven't read Cat's Eye, but I read Handmaid's Tale a long time ago, and I was talking about this with someone, and I was urged by her to read it again because she said when she first read it, it was a very powerful novel. It's basically about a dystopian future where feminism is completely fucking gone. And she said when she first read it, it was a disturbing hypothetical that seemed all too possible. She said reading it again now, it seems a little disturbingly closer to reality.
Definitely. So. I know that I first read that book when I was like a freshman in high school. And, you don't really, I think too, because of my age, I wasn't really thinking on those terms. But now that I'm older, like when I see Rick Santorum, I just think, oh my God, we're headed straight for A Handmaid's Tale. I just have to get ready for whatever. I'd probably be like the forced labor or something. Because I think she was like 32 and I'm that age, and I don't know.
The character or Margaret Atwood?
Fred. Yeah. But I don't know. I don't know how long they keep They keep you around. I don't want to be a concubine or a handmaid. So anyway, thank you for listening. Theme music by Joseph Scardetta. Join us next week when we talk about Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. And here's our music. Yeah, music.